Okay, guys, welcome to lesson 13. So far, we've talked about decomposers, producers, and consumers. And then last week, we talked about herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. So now that we've gotten to this point, we're going to talk about what role they kind of play in the food chain. So, lesson 13, food chain. Now, in this lesson, what I really want you guys to do, because I'm sure you're sick of hearing my voice, I know Philip is. What you guys are going to do is you guys are going to go into the Google Slides that I shared, and you're going to watch this specific video. It talks all about different food chains, so make sure that you watch that video. Now, in these different slides, I wanted to give you guys some quick pictures about what a food chain looks like and what the definition of a food chain is and what the purpose of a food chain is. So now, a food chain is a model that shows how energy flows between living things in an ecosystem. Organisms will eat things to get energy to grow, reproduce, and survive. That's the main reason why we focus on food chains. Now, with food chains, in this one specifically, you look at one strand of an ecosystem of what eats that. Now, you have your producer. Remember, your producer is the thing that goes through photosynthesis. As you can see, sun, water, and carbon dioxide makes their own food, and then they throw out oxygen for us to breathe. Now, what comes along is the primary consumer or herbivore, like we talked about, and they eat the grass to get energy to move, survive, and reproduce. Now, once that thing is eating the grass and surviving and running around, along comes the secondary consumer, which is the omnivore. Sometimes it's just a carnivore, sometimes it's just a herbivore, but omnivore, it could be that, which omnivore means it eats meat and plants. Now, the omnivore the animal in this one, the frog, eats the grasshopper, and that's how it gets its energy. Now, next is the tertiary consumer. This is the thing, the snake, that is only a carnivore. It only eats meat. And in eating meat, what it does is it eats the frog. And then what eats the snake, the person that's at the top of the food chain, is this hawk. And it just kind of goes in a cycle like this. And then the hawk, nothing really hunts him, so it'll probably just die from old age or, being injured, something like that. And then it'll go back into the ground, and the fungi and bacteria will decompose it and put the hawk's nutrients back into the ground. So this is how energy is transferred. The grasshopper eats the grass, the frog eats the grasshopper to get energy, the snake eats the frog to get energy, and then the hawk eats the snake. And then all of these guys will eventually pass away or be turned into feces, and then the fungi will break that down and put it back into the ground for the grass to eat. So that's a real simplistic way of looking at how energy is transferred, is through a food chain. A more complicated way is called a food web. Now, this is a more complicated version of the food chain. It's called a food web. The reason it is more complicated because it shows how all the different organisms transfer energy by what they eat. For example, in some ecosystems, carnivores like to eat rabbits. This doesn't mean that all carnivores in that ecosystem like to eat rabbits, or they might not have the adaptations to be able to catch rabbits, to eat them at all. It also means that not all herbivores can eat a certain kind of plants. Like not all herbivores eat grass. They might not be able to digest it properly. It might not give them the proper nutrients that they need. So each ecosystem has certain animals that'll eat stuff, and the food web shows us that. Now, this is a little bit confusing, but if we look at it and break it down and follow the arrows, so we can see that these animals all eat these different types of plants, nuts, seeds, fruit, and then what eats these animals is quite different. So if we look at the deer over here, and we follow this turquoise line, we can see what will eat that deer. Now, we follow that up, the mountain lion will eat that deer. If we follow this up over here, the coyote will eat that deer. But none of the secondary consumers will eat that deer. Now, what else will eat one of these animals? Let's look at the squirrel. Now, the squirrel, if we follow these lines, the pine marten will eat the squirrel. The rabbit will eat the squirrel. The raven will even eat the squirrel. and the ringtail will even eat the squirrel. That's because they probably have the ability to catch squirrels a little bit easier than these animals up at the top, the tertiary consumers. So the coyote, mountain lion, and bobcat. So those are a couple different looks at the food web. That's why, and in looking at this, it really shows how biodiversity is really important, because if you only have coyotes and ravens and mule deer, um, all the coyotes will eat all the mule deer, and maybe the mule deer will eat all of the certain plants, and it'll really throw the ecosystem out of balance. So remember, you guys, if you have any questions, make sure that you come and ask us during our office hours, 11 to 1. Good luck.